Well, welcome everyone to the 27th Degree with Chris and Nancy, brought to you by 27 Degrees Consulting. Today we're very excited to have Dereck and Michele with us. Dereck works in law enforcement, Michele in healthcare, and we're going to talk a little bit about human trafficking. Before we get going, though, I just want to take a moment to mention our sponsor, Bay Coast Bank, which is just right for all of your financial needs. Visit baycoastbank.com or call 508-678-7641 to learn more. Great bank that I personally use. So without further ado, let's get on to this discussion about human trafficking. So why don't we just start by defining what it is. So what is it? Maybe we can start with that, because I think a lot of people out there probably don't have a good sense of what it is and what the scope of the problem is.
Yeah, you take that one.
Okay, I'll take this. So, good morning. Human trafficking is identified in two different avenues that it can travel. We have sex trafficking, and then you have labor trafficking. And anytime somebody is forced to do something through what they say force, fraud, or coercion, to do something against their will, that is a form of trafficking, and it would depend on whether it's a sexual act or to do some type of labor, like working through force, fraud, or coercion. That person that's involved in that act is considered a victim of human trafficking.
Great.
You know, when Michele started to talk to me a little bit about this first and talk about the task force that you've been involved with and everything, I was just like shocked, because I was like, my idea of human trafficking didn't involve the labor part at all. So I'm glad you brought that out as part of that definition. I was just thinking, oh, it's like sex trafficking with kids, and it doesn't happen here. You know, like that was my kind of whole understanding. So to find out that there's actually community task force and this is being addressed in our area was a real shocker to me. You know, so can you talk, I guess, can you talk like just a little bit about that? Because I think a lot of people came from my perspective. Like, as
Michele,
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you now.
So that's a common reaction that I encounter when discussing human trafficking, either within my profession or, you know, with personal conversations, is that either people are aware of human trafficking, but they don't feel like it exists in their community, or they have no awareness whatsoever about what human trafficking is. And, you know, we can engage in a conversation about that. So it's very common, you know, to hear, you know, that doesn't happen here. Like and the perception that, you know, it's an individual who is, you know, locked in chains in a basement or in handcuffs, or, you know, that they're physically being forced to stay, you know, in a situation by some sort of bondage, if you will, meaning, you know, like a, you know, like a physical, you know, bondage, chains, handcuffs, those, because we hear about those extreme cases in the news, right? You know, 3 teenage girls found in a basement, handcuffed for a year. That's really what people's perception is of human trafficking. And that is, as I mentioned, the extreme cases, but so far from what happens on an everyday basis in our communities.
And if I can add one note to that, another common misperception of human trafficking is when I say human trafficking, people think of smuggling, right? The idea of a handful of people being smuggled from outside of the United States or from another country over a border into a country.
Okay.
That's the smuggling of people. And the difference between the two is majority of the people being smuggled from countries into other countries are doing that consensually because they're trying to get into another country on an unlawful way to make a better life.
Okay.
Right. So they call them smuggling. They call people coyotes, where I pay you a certain amount of money and you're going to help me get across the border so I can live somewhere else.
Okay.
I'm doing that consensually. Now, of course, they tie together where when I get to that new location, I may become a victim of human trafficking because I now owe money to a certain person if I wasn't able to pay my entire debt for the transport. Now I become a victim of human trafficking. But a lot of people think, oh, trafficking, oh, it's somebody in a truck that's underneath the truck bed being delivered to somewhere else. Not necessarily. Like, again, the 3 words that are the beginning of this that build the foundation for trafficking is when you're forced. It's force, fraud, or coercion. If one of those three things exists, and you're either through those force, fraud, or coercion doing sexual activities or some type of labor for someone else, you are a victim of human trafficking.
Okay. How big is the scope? I'm sorry, Nancy, I'm talking over you. I was just
No,
curious.
that's okay. No, I was going to actually ask the same exact question.
Wow. Amazing.
Incredible.
What's the question?
Yeah, how big is the scope of the problem? I don't think we understand how much of an issue this is.
Wow.
I would say that, I mean, it's grossly underreported because of the lack of knowledge and education about what human trafficking actually is. There's an organization called the Polaris Foundation that you can visit for information on data and statistics, you know, in regards to human trafficking reporting. And I can tell you that within the past 5 years, the reporting of, you know, concerns for human trafficking has increased because there is, you know, a hotline to report concerns. And I know, you know, at some point today, we'll talk about, you know, what resources are for people who are either, you know, feel like they're involved in a human trafficking situation. And I think that's also an important element to discuss, is that there are, you know, situations where someone's involved in human trafficking, a human trafficking element, and they're not even aware themselves that they're being trafficked.
Okay.
Because they are, you know, in a relationship where they may think that, you know, they believe that the person who's trafficking them is their boyfriend, you know, and they get coerced, you know, to perform acts, you know, for money, or it's a labor situation where they're being forced to go out into the community and work, and, you know, then provide all of their, you know, financial gains from their employment to the person who's actually trafficking them. And they don't recognize that. They recognize that relationship as a loving relationship, as a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship. And so they may not even acknowledge the fact that they're being trafficked.
Okay.
Is it a bigger problem than like drugs and guns and everything, or is it just a different kind of problem?
It's more profitable with less likelihood of being prosecuted for the crime. So it's more lucrative for somebody. And the example that people use is if I'm a sex trafficker, if I'm a drug dealer, once I sell that bag of drugs to somebody, the product is gone. I can no longer make any more money off that product because somebody's going to consume it.
Mm-hmm.
With sex trafficking, the person that's the victim can be used over and over again. So you're continuously making money from, I don't want to say the product, from that victim. Unlike drugs, where once you give the drugs up, you have to go get more drugs to make more money.
Right. Makes sense.
The victim never leaves. Now you have a victim of trafficking who you're using as a victim, and you continue to make a profit from that victim's services, who is being forced through fraudulent behavior or through coercion to do sexual activities for someone, and then the person who's the sex trafficker profits from that each time.
Okay.
Dereck, how easy is it to catch these guys?
Well, it's not easy. That's another thing, right? So in the law enforcement world, when somebody's trafficking drugs or somebody's drug dealing, it's very common for us to catch them out in the street, handing the drugs to people, in public, doing these things, meeting up cars, meet up with each other. You see the drugs, you see money being handed off, and a lot of times the victims of you know, the people that are living in addiction will help the police with this information. When it comes to human trafficking, number one, it doesn't happen in public very often because of the actual nature of the crime. Number two, the people that are receiving the customers, they're not going to come forward and tell us because of what they're doing, right? They're engaged in this behavior.
Okay.
And most of the times, the victims are terrified to go to the police because they don't know what the person that's trafficking them is going to do to them if they come forward. And a lot of times, like Michele already kind of mentioned, is they're brainwashed to think that they're in a loving relationship and don't even understand that they are a victim of human trafficking. So it continues this pattern until behavior gets so violent and aggressive that they are either caught through some type of long-term investigation with multiple agencies, or they come forward and say, okay, I've had enough of this. This is what's been going on in my life. I'd like a change. This guy is trafficking me, or this woman is trafficking me to do things.
Interesting. Yeah.
If I can mention, I do in the scope. I do have a stat that we got from the Children's Advocacy Center out of Fall River. It's a great organization. We'll give you some more information on it after. But through their website, they have stated that at least 100,000 children are used in prostitution every year in the United States.
What?
Yeah. The average age of entry into the sex industry is 12 to 14 years old.
That's just horrifying.
And I wanted to share that because you mentioned what is the scope. That should give you an idea of just a small piece of how it starts and how big it can get.
Right, and that's a small piece for it, right? I mean, there's adults who are also brought into it. There are people who you say are brought into the labor force and exploited that way also. So this is a large problem. You know, the statistic you gave is one small piece of the pie, correct?
Very small. And that's the National Human Trafficking Hotline between 2012 and 2016 received almost 2,400 substantiated calls for human trafficking.
Wow. Who's vulnerable there? Who are the people that are vulnerable to being trafficked? Is there a certain part of the population that's more at risk than others?
So we mentioned, in speaking about, the child element of human trafficking and that age group that's prime. If you think about the ages of between 12 and 14, specifically, females, the predominantly females. And so that's an age where there's a lot of vulnerability in, a young girl's confidence in herself.
Right.
Human traffickers, are watching for that, right? So if they, they're kind of trolling, if you will, like the malls and the locations where these young females, will gather, and if there's a hint of a lack of confidence, we are not, the young woman isn't making eye contact, or she appears to be shy. Maybe she's not someone who like puts on makeup or has her hair done like that. Those are indicators that there's some sort of self-confidence, lack of self-confidence, and so that's an opportunity for the trafficker to approach that person and then give them a level of confidence, like, oh my, you're so beautiful, your hair is beautiful, and then that's a figure of authority or an element in that person's life that they may not have at home. So they engage person, and then it may build a relationship where they think that this is their boyfriend. And it's important to mention that I think we also have a picture in our mind of what that trafficker looks like. So we go back and think, well, they're someone who drives a great car, and they have funky hats, and that's what comes to my mind when I think about this. But the average age of a trafficker from the male population is the late teens, so 17 to 19 years old.
No kidding.
Yeah, and so that's not the vision you have in your mind.
No.
Of what a trafficker looks like, or the age population.
Okay.
So
I had a totally different view.
Do the average traffickers then, if they're 17, 18, 19, are they part of a larger ring, I guess, if you will, that they're the ones that are going out and like soliciting these girls or grabbing these girls?
A lot of them learn from another generation. So similar to drug dealing, they get involved in the wrong crowds. They meet someone who's engaged in this behavior, been doing it for years. They see the nice car, they see the money, they see, the ability to do this. And a lot of the traffickers come from, broken homes to begin with as juveniles. So when they get involved and they meet somebody who, hey, listen, kid, come under my wing. I'm going to show you the ropes. I'm going to teach you the game. And then once the minor, the younger man or younger woman, whoever the trafficker is, learns about the techniques and the profit that can be made, all it takes is one vulnerable victim.
Yeah.
And when we talk about vulnerability, this problem is only going to grow with, the transgender community. They're already seeing cases where, because teens and adolescents who don't feel inclusive in any certain population, they run away from home because, some conservative households won't accept them for who they may be, he, her, she, him. They don't know what the families don't understand, so these children become homeless or go looking for someone who will accept them in their community, and the traffickers are looking for this. They are looking for that vulnerable population to say, "Oh, are you hurt? Are you sad? Does anybody care for you? Does anybody love you? Well, I will. Come hang out with me for a little while." Right? And they start building that, as we talk about, trust is built in small amounts, right? So they start off as a normal friendship or a loving relationship. They build trust in small increments, and they get that person who's vulnerable to believe in them and trust that they're going to do what's best for them. And then as they get into a relationship, then normally at some point the trafficker will turn from love to fear, and they'll become violent, they'll become aggressive. And then once that happens, the person is now dependent on their trafficker and feels that they have no other choice but to listen to the person because they know what's best for them, because they've been so supportive and given them the love and attention and things that they need, which they never got before or hadn't seen in a long time, or whatever environment they came from.
Okay. So one question I have, because probably a lot of our viewers are parents and they're thinking about this right now. How do we protect our children? What would you recommend? What would be some good guidelines so we can protect against this type of activity?
I think the first thing, so we have this, element of the internet, right? Where, and now more than ever, our children are on, technology almost the entire day. And so really monitoring, what they're looking at on the internet, because that is, a wide net for traffickers to acquire, new victims, by engaging children in internet conversations. So again, element of trust and inclusivity. So really for parents to be mindful of what their children are doing, on the internet.
Okay.
There's the Children's Advocacy Center in Florida, again, they have a list of red flags that parents can look at, and I can name some to you. So these are things that, and we see this in law enforcement, healthcare sees this sometimes when juveniles come in. A lot of juveniles who live in DCF-run facilities become victims of trafficking. We can talk about that. But some of the common red flags are, your child comes home, they have an excessive amount of money or new things, right? Somebody bought them new jewelry. Somebody bought them a brand new cell phone. They're wearing brand new clothes. They don't have a job. You didn't give them any money. Where they get these things? They come home with a new tattoo or some type of mark on them, which some traffickers will brand their victim. They have, the signs of sexual abuse. You find your child's taking photos of themselves and posting them in places, or you walk in on their bedroom and they have some kind of, probably not necessarily appropriate photos. Where are those photos going? Who are they sharing them with? Right? Things like Snapchat. Some of these traffickers will create groups, and they'll ask victims to send them photos, and then they post those online and they advertise that girl as someone that they can that a customer can ask for. So it becomes, in some sense, it also becomes, the sharing of child pornography in the same sense as the trafficking. If they come home, if there's signs of physical trauma, nourishment and neglect, if you're a good parent, you're paying attention to your child on a somewhat regular basis, you'd be able to notice if they came home with a new pair of jeans, a watch, a new cell phone, they had money in their pocket, or they're running away every day. They run away every night at 10 o'clock at night and they return at 8 o'clock in the morning exhausted. Where were they all night? They didn't go to a friend's house to sleep over. They're off something most likely that may not be appropriate, and it's worth looking into that.
Right. So it sounds like a lot of it is being an observant parent, being aware of what your children are doing, and probably communicating too. Having those open lines of communication with your children, which is hard in the internet world. Right. We're all so busy and whatnot. Maybe sitting down at dinner and making a goal to have dinner every night together and talk together and to see what's going on in their lives.
Yes.
So
Go ahead.
Can I ask the question too? I mean, it seems like there's a vulnerable population out there, and what are their red flags to know they're in a relationship that, hey, maybe I need to be a little careful here. If I'm 12 or 14 or 19 or 22, and I am with a guy that I think I love, or with anyone who's treating me nice, like, what are the red flags for me to know, you know what, this might, maybe I'm getting into a little trouble here.
Come out for the victim?
Like, I guess, and what I'm asking, like, Michele, I know you've done a lot of work and getting awareness out. Like, if you're creating like a screening tool, or if you're talking to nurses and you're saying, you know, watch out for this, like, what are the kind of the things that you're telling them? But what are, like, how do you talk with someone who's in a relationship like that?
So it's very similar to a conversation that you would have about domestic violence, which is something in the healthcare arena that we screen for all the time, and that's the mandate for domestic abuse. Signs, and symptoms, if you will, are very similar. And some of the red flags that Dereck mentioned, in regards to, the younger population, if we see someone come in, I work in emergency medicine, so if someone comes in and seeks care, and I want to say that in my research, I've identified that greater than 80% of human trafficking victims have sought care in emergency departments, and there's a very low percentage that are within those groups. Think about the environment of emergency medicine. It's not, it's unlike a primary care provider, right? You're not seeing the same provider all the time who may recognize that something's not right? So they have a history with you, they have a relationship. And, if you're your primary care provider, in emergency medicine, you can visit, emergency department, 5 times in a month and never see the same clinician. So, things can go, unrecognized because you don't have relationships established with the patients. Oftentimes they come in with their trafficker, or they come in with other individuals that are involved in the trafficking that try, they may identify themselves as, this is my sister. It's someone else that's in the life that is there to ensure that this person doesn't divulge any information that might uncover, the situation that exists. And it's emergency departments are, the perfect place for these individuals to seek care because of those elements. But the same things that Dereck described as red flags. So you see a young woman who, reports that, she's not working, she, but she has, very elaborate clothing, or, a teenager who has done, and, excessive jewelry, 2 cell phones, like those red flags that would call out to you that, how is this person getting, all of these,
Michele, I'm going to have you just lean in a little bit towards the mic. There you go.
So, I mean, just the, those same elements, and again, the branding. So looking for tattoos, and, this sounds, it's very unsettling to think about this, but, a lot of, these young ladies have, particular tattoos that are relational to human trafficking. So barcode tattoos, which actually brands them as, your mom, you're of this brand. And so if you're not tuned into looking for those types of cues, I mean, we see tattoos on everyone nowadays, so you can't necessarily pick that out. Related tattoos. So that's one element as well. And oftentimes, it's hard. You'd have to get that person alone to really have that. And oftentimes, them similar situation does not allow that to happen. And there are, and not a lot of emergency departments have screening tools for human trafficking.
Okay. So Dereck, and with what you see out on the streets, is it more of an organized feel, or is this just someone just taking advantage of a situation and moving into another area?
So one thing that I've been a police officer for a number of years, and there's 2 different things that we see now that I may not have been necessarily aware of when I was a younger police officer. Number one is a lot of these DCF run facilities along in the state, and I'm sure other states, where children don't have a permanent home. They're sent to these short-term residential areas because child and family service or whoever's looking for proper care for these children. When they're teenagers, what happens is they go to these locations where the traffickers that live in those cities know that these locations exist. So they kind of loiter around these neighborhoods, and often they'll get one young girl or one young boy who's a resident of this facility to run away from the facility and spend time with them. And they recruit that person through buying them nice stuff. Remember, these are children who are vulnerable, maybe come from bad families or bad environments, have no family they call family, are living from facility to facility. Now they land at a location where they meet somebody who's really nice to them. Hey, come out for the night. Come out. We're going to bring you partying. Right? You're 15 years old. Oh man, this is nice. Hey, come hang out. Hey, have a drink. Hey, have some marijuana. Hey, you need some money in your pocket. $40 cash to a kid who has never seen money is the world.
Yeah.
Hey, you need some new clothes. Let's go to the mall. I'll take you shopping. Next thing you know, that child now runs away from the facility. Now the facility can't stop those kids from running away. So what happens? Dereck runs away tonight. The facility calls police. They file a missing person report. Dereck returns in the morning. Dereck has brand new clothes, phones, money. The facility calls police. Says, "Oh, Dereck returned. Everything's good." Well, guess what happens when Dereck goes back? Now I go to Michele and I say, "Hey, you got to come hang out with this guy. He's really good. He's going to take care of us." And they recruit within the facilities without even realizing they're helping the trafficker out. Next thing you know, there's 2 or 3 girls or boys that are running away on a nightly basis and taking off. Now the trafficker will start taking them to motels along the state. They'll drive an hour away with these children. They'll rent a motel room. They'll put these children in a room, and these children will perform sexual acts for customers all night long. And then the trafficker will return them in the morning and give them a little bit of money in their pocket. And the children feel like they're appreciated, and they do it. And what is that?
Dereck, how hard is it to catch the guys? I mean,
it normally
do you,
takes
like
it normally takes either a sting on a motel or a hotel knowing this is happening, or it takes a victim coming forward. It's very hard for police, especially the mock police cruisers, the officers in uniform. It's very hard for a street officer to identify this on their own.
right.
Now, the second piece that's a little different is when you look at prostitution. If you drive down a bad neighborhood in a city, you might see a prostitute that's out walking in the street. Most of the prostitutes are living in addiction. They're addicted to some type of substance, no fault of their own. They're living in addiction. So how do they support their habit? Most of the time through prostitution. What people don't realize is a lot of times that prostitution is done through a pimp. So if I'm living in addiction and I'm prostituting, I'm either doing it because I want the money and I want to get drugs for myself, or there's somebody in the background telling me, "Hey, you're going to go out and you're going to serve these people that I'm sending to you, or else I'm not giving you the drugs to say so you don't get sick." So out of the fear of getting sick, through coercion, I'm told, "Okay, you want to get those opiates so you can feel better? Then you're going to have to go perform these acts on 2 or 3 guys in the next hour. And if you do what I say, when you return, I'm going to give you enough of those opiates so that you don't get sick later on." And that happens. And these women are almost prisoners, even though you see them freely walking the streets. They're prisoners in their addiction, and they're prisoners to somebody else who's using them to make a profit through sexual acts, just so that victim of trafficking and person living in addiction doesn't get sick.
How do they get help? I mean, if they've come to a point where they're like, "I just don't want to do this anymore," like where do they go that they're not going to feel like they're getting in trouble, or they're going to be punished, or they know that they can be safe? Like, how do they get out?
Well, I think to be proactive, educating the community of healthcare and law enforcement to recognize, because oftentimes, as we describe these individuals who come in, who interact with either healthcare or law enforcement, we may not recognize that this is the situation that they're in. So we identify them as drug addicts, they have a mental health problem. We don't dig beneath that, right? We don't peel back the layer to say why this occurring. What has happened in this person's history that has brought them to the place where they're abusing drugs or that they're in, you know, a violent relationship. And we don't know to ask the right questions, and we don't know to look for the right clues. And oftentimes they're not ready, or they don't recognize it themselves. So it's difficult. And I think, you know, the lack of awareness and education only compounds that. And it's interesting to me that our conversation really, and as it always does, leans so much toward prostitution, drug abuse, sex trafficking, children, because that's where most people go when they talk about trafficking. And the element, you know, that we started to talk about initially of the labor trafficking really goes unnoticed. But in our community, in this local geography, there's a lot of different professions that have a high prevalence of trafficking. You know, the restaurant industry, the hotel industry, the agricultural industry, the fishing industry. So if you think about, you know, individuals who are undocumented in the United States, and they may have been coerced to come here with, you know, an offer of, you know, we have this great job for you that pays, you know, a lot of money, and you can support your family, and we're going to bring you, you know, have, you know, to this, you know, location, and you're going to, you know, you'll be able to, you know, send that money back to your family. And they, you know, acknowledge that, and they take that opportunity, and then they end up in a situation where, you know, they're being forced to work to pay back a debt to bring, it's not what they were told it was going to be. So through coercion, they were brought to an industry to perform labor for, you know, a proprietor that gave under false pretenses, and then they have no way of, you know, of getting out from under that, right? They're dependent on that person for their, you know, for food, for housing, and oftentimes they're, you know, forced to work multiple hours a day, 18 hours a day. They're not being fed properly. Their health is suffering. So they may enter the healthcare system and the emergency department with a physical injury, or they, you know, they have a laceration, you know, and you get into a conversation with, you know, a gentleman about, you know, they may divulge to you, you know, an element that you might not pick up on, like, I'm so exhausted. Well, why are you so exhausted? Well, I only sleep 4 hours a night. Well, unless you engage in that conversation, you're never going to uncover that layer, because here's a, you know, 35-year-old man who's here with a laceration to his arm because he works in a restaurant and, you know, inadvertently, you know, cut his arm with a knife. Like, that is common, but unless we dig under that and peel back the layers, there may be so much more to that. And this doesn't only happen in lower socioeconomic communities. This occurs in affluent communities as well. There have been documented cases of university professors and high-level executives that hire, help, nannies, home help, that they coerce these individuals, coming from other countries, saying, if you come, we'll bring all of your family over, we'll create a life for you here. And then they're kind of imprisoned in that environment and only allowed to go out, to certain places a day. And so that's, that is trafficking, that is labor trafficking. And that's a whole other element that I think, gets, it's not as, I don't know, was not as much attention paid to it, if you will.
Right.
I can give you an example of labor trafficking that the majority of your audience has probably experienced and not realized. You ever get a knock at your door for some young person trying to sell you magazines, and when you turn them away, they jump back in a van with 5 other kids and drive off?
Mhm.
Yeah.
90% of those cases are labor trafficking. They find adolescents around the country that are vulnerable, that don't have jobs. They offer them the opportunity to travel and make money, and those kids basically will go day to day for peanuts, if nothing, trying to sell magazines to these people. And they get sent from motel to motel. They're given maybe 1 meal a day. They might be given $20 for the day, and they work 10, 12, 14, 16 hours. They don't know the kids they're with. And when they ask to go back home, they go, well, you got to pay for it yourself. But they don't have any money. So it continues. Those are...
Dereck, it's just like, how do you stop something like that? I mean, it almost seems like it's just so hard to
Well, so you have to be confident that, like, if we're telling you, hey, this is a potential example, as a citizen, if somebody comes to your door and, you look outside and there's a van out there with a Nebraska license plate on it, and there's 5 or 6, young people walking your neighborhood, different races, ethnicities, sex, maybe take the license plate down as a citizen, call the police and say, hey, I have this random van from Nebraska in my neighborhood. I think it could be human trafficking. They were trying to sell magazines that kids look really hungry and tired. Here's the license plate. And then it's up to law enforcement to take action with that and maybe try to locate the van. Like in some communities, you're required, when you're going to solicit anything, you're required to inform the chief of police and the city hall.
Right.
Hey, I'm going to be soliciting my wares in your neighborhood. Here's my license plate. Here's my name. Here's my license. And if that's valid, you're going to do that. When these people are doing illicit activity like trafficking these children, they don't call the chief of police and say, hey, just a heads up, here's my license plate. I'm bringing 6 young adults to these neighborhoods to sell magazines, because they don't want to get caught.
So Dereck, do the police know to, in most communities to look for that stuff? So for example, I had this happen to me where a van pulled up into my neighborhood with out-of-state plates, and there were, a bunch of, they were actually adults, but they were, kind of canvassing the neighborhood, trying to sell magazines. And it just looked really fishy. So I called the local police and I told them, and they said, well, I don't think they have a permit. We'll come by and check it out. I don't know what happened after that. Would they be cognizant of the fact that this could be a human trafficking issue? Or are they just going the step, well, we'll see if they have a permit, and if not, we'll kind of move them on to the next area?
So it's unfortunate because it's not a traditional crime in the sense of where we have, historical data to support so many great law enforcement cases. This has really only come to the forefront, and I would say, maybe the last 10, 15 years where we're talking about this openly. So this is still fairly new for law enforcement, and depending on which community you live or work in, the police may not have this in their training repertoire so that the street officers are aware of it. They may stop that van and say, hey, sir, who are you? Now, again, right, how does that person driving a van react? Do they start recording the police and say, hey, you're violating my rights? Does the police have to back off, say, hey, I was just checking to make sure everyone's okay? Yeah, everyone's fine. Right now, the victims are trained to answer questions for the law enforcement or for medical professionals so they can remain safe. I'm in the van. I tell Michele, if you tell the cops anything, your name's Jen, and you live in Missouri, and you're here because I'm your uncle, and you're making some money for the summer. Now, when police pull us over, hey, who are you? Oh, my name's Jen Belong. I live in Missouri. This is my uncle Barry, and we're selling magazines for the summer so I can make extra money. Oh,
Yeah.
stories match up, right? I can't really prod any further without violating somebody's amendment rights or constitutional rights. So the police might know that in a call for service. Hey, stop this van. Here's the information we got, and that's the end of it.
Yeah.
Unless it takes either some kind of investigation being open because somebody comes forward as a victim. Police find something through interactions when people call police that is like for myself, I might be a little more trained to recognize these things where I'm going to dig a little more into that personally because I have some training that helps me understand what's going on there. That could be, again, peeling the layers back. Hey, there's more to this story. I might pull her aside and say, all right, I understand that you're telling me your name is Jen, but, hey, are you okay? When's the last time you ate? Is this really your uncle? Where's he live? Can you give me his address? Hey, what's that tattoo mean on your wrist? Oh, hey, how many magazines have you sold today? Where are you staying? Next thing you know, you start finding some inconsistencies in the story. I might go back to my cruiser and call somebody from the domestic violence or juvenile unit or something like that and say, hey, I need your help down
Okay.
here.
Dereck, what are the laws?
Go ahead.
What are the laws like for the people that are perpetrating these?
So in Massachusetts, you cannot, if you receive any monies as a result of any type of trafficking, it's a felony. So even receiving monies through prostitution, like I send somebody out to do an act, they come back and give me the money, that is a major felony in Massachusetts. If you can prove it, you need probable cause as a police officer to say, hey, it's more probable than not that this person received money after ordering that person to go do the act. So you need a few people to be able to come forward and give you the information. So that's a felony. Any type of any child crime, sex crime, always a felony. And even with adults, if you traffic an adult or you force them to do prostitution in Massachusetts, those are all felony offenses and serious offenses in the court's eyes.
So just talk about that for a sec. So when you say like felony, we're talking kind of guaranteed jail time that goes along with that?
Yeah,
Or is
so
that, is it first offense, second offense, all that stuff?
in Massachusetts, you have misdemeanors and felonies. The difference is any felony offense in Massachusetts carries 2.5 years or more in state prison.
Okay.
Right. A felony offense, police have the arrest power anywhere in Massachusetts to make that arrest. So I could be, in my home in a different town than I work, and I have probable cause that somebody walking by my house committed. It's actually called. It's you need more than probable cause from outside my jurisdiction, and they get into some procedure stuff there. But you pretty much you can make those arrests anywhere in Massachusetts. If the person committed a felony offense, it's very serious offenses.
So
So
what
Derek,
about the end users? What are they looking at if they get caught with a girl or a guy in a motel room?
So I think that's been the concern as we progress and with the courts and a lot of legislature, and there's a lot of good politicians in the state that have really pushed and advocated. I'm not sure about Rhode Island, but I know in Massachusetts, is it Montigny? Senator Montigny's been a huge proponent of stronger human trafficking law, so credit to him for that. The idea is if you can't stop customers you can't prevent them, or at least have strong enough offenses for them, right? So if a customer buys sex from a prostitute, there's a crime. It's engaging in sex for a fee. It's a misdemeanor. So, but if that customer is consistently buying sex and they get arrested once, but they bought sex 100 times in the last year from 2 or 3 different women that are being trafficked, they're going to go to court. They might get a fine. They might get what we call a quaff, a continue without a finding from the judge who says, hey, listen, pay $100 restitution. I don't want to see you out there again. That's not going to stop that person from going back and finding either a different trafficker or a different girl to buy those sexual, acts from. So when we talk about the end user, the end users drive the business.
okay.
There's some federal laws related to trafficking that are extremely strong against, the end users. Like there's a federal law where a lot of times people in the United States will travel outside the United States to other countries, and they'll buy children or they'll buy sex from children in these other countries. When they return to the United States, if they can prove it, they can be prosecuted here for some serious crimes from going overseas or going to other countries and doing that. But on a state level, the offenses, unless it involves children, which are always major offenses, if it involves just adults, it's much harder to prosecute the end user for a major crime compared to what you may do if you can prove a case against a trafficker.
So this is such a disgusting problem, and obviously it's very broad. What can we do? Those of us that are normal citizens, not in police, not in healthcare, what can we do to help out to fix this problem, to reduce this problem?
I think number one, it starts at home.
Mm-hmm.
To learn about it, and I think that's how I.
Michelle, just move forward a little bit. I'm sorry.
That's how I guess I don't say gained an interest, but when I heard about 10 years ago now, heard the terminology human trafficking, and I've been in healthcare for more than 20 years, I was not even familiar with what that meant. So, I, educated myself and was, as you said, very disturbed by the concept and, the fact that this actually happens, and, put myself in positions where, connected with organizations, both grassroots and in the community, to learn more and acknowledge the fact that this is very prevalent in our community. And as, a leader in the healthcare industry, I felt it was important to educate my team because I didn't know what it was. They certainly didn't know what it was, and we weren't acknowledging that, within our own healthcare community. So we need to be educated. We need to educate others in the community to recognize what this is. We need to educate people how to report it. We need to identify people who may be victims, and they may acknowledge, that person may acknowledge that they're in an unsafe situation, but they're not ready to leave it. And we can't force that to happen. Especially in healthcare, we can recognize it. We can acknowledge that we have resources to help, but unless that individual is ready for that, it may take 10 or 20 times, of intervention for them to accept, the situation that they're in and acknowledge that there's another way, that there's a better way. But it always starts with education. And I think for the child population, for parents, it's really to be aware of what your children are doing, both on the intranet and, in their personal relationships with their friends, and what the red flags are.
Where can anyone listening get more information? Are there certain websites they should look at? Dereck, you had mentioned something at the beginning.
You have it's the Human Trafficking Hotline website. That's it's through the U.S. Department of Justice. So it's the National Human Trafficking Resource Center. It's humantraffickinghotline.org. And for anyone who's listening who might be living in a situation like that, might need help, the anonymous toll-free number to call for help is 1-888-373-7888, or you can text them at 233-733, and that is all confidential, and they will help you immediately. Another
We'll post
site,
those numbers also. We'll post all these numbers on the website later on, or on the Facebook page.
Is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. That is missingkids.org. They can be reached toll free at 1-800-843-5678. And they have a tip sheet on their website for runaway children. Runaway children are probably one of the most vulnerable populations, because when a child runs away from whatever environment they live in, they don't have the resources to be independent on their own, and they become immediately vulnerable in their community, even if it's only for one night running away. So there's also a couple pretty large nonprofit websites, organizations that have been around for a long time that are great resources to learn about for people listening. You have what they call the Polaris Project. That's polarisproject.org. And then you have Thorn, Thorn, thorn.org. And that is devoted to children in child trafficking.
Okay.
Now, Thorn, I just want to say this, because I think this is great. This is a positive thing that's come out of this. Thorn created a tool for law enforcement and it's only for law enforcement, where it's called a spotlight, where we can go on and law enforcement can go on, and actually the tool draws any sex for a fee service with children that is available right now. Like, so Backpage was a famous website where a lot of ads were put out there for children. Any ad where a child's potentially trafficked, you put in the geographic area, and Thorn filters through every illegal website and pulls out all the data and gives it to law enforcement. Hey, here's all your children listed right now for sex trafficking or potential ads for sex in your area.
That's great.
For law enforcement. And then locally, one of the organizations, there's many churches and nonprofits in the area. If somebody was to just search, human trafficking near me, and Google might be able to find some locations depending on what part of the state you live in. Where we are down there, Bristol County, you have the Children's Advocacy Center. They're a wonderful resource. It's cacofbc.org. They are located in Fall River, New Bedford, and in Attleboro, and they have a toll-free line after hours of 1-800-792-5200.
Dereck, can you forward me all that information? What we're going to do, and Taylor, I know you're listening, what we're going to do is use our social media platforms just to post all this information and all during the week, so people can have access to this. The
last one I have to mention that we spend a lot of time working with is HEAL, HEAL, HEAL Human Trafficking. They are a huge proponent, and
it's an international organization, and it was really its foundation is with Mass General Hospital, and they are very focused on the healthcare element and identification, and there are they do training, their identification tools, assessment tools. It's really a very rich website for information for the healthcare workers.
That's great. Thank you, Michele.
Great.
So as we kind of wrap up, is there anything else you want to get out there as a message for the people listening right now?
I think an important message, because this can go across any workforce, any person, is, a lot of times when you're working in your field or at the grocery store, or, if you wondered how can I help, well, just be, the famous see something, say something. When you're in a grocery store and behind you is a man and he's got a woman with him and she's not saying a word, she's got her head looking down, he's carrying all the money, it just looks like odd to you, like you feel like something's not right. The least you could do is stop and talk to, loss prevention. Hey, listen, I'm not sure what's going on. Or call the police. Say, hey, I saw, follow them to see what car they get into, get a license plate. Hey, I saw this guy and this girl. She looked like she might have been in trouble, right? Adult or juvenile.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm really concerned. Here's the license plate. If you call the police and give that information, that is a great first step. I think it's really important, if people care about something like this, to educate themselves, as Michele said earlier. The websites we listed and that you'll list for your folks later on, those are resource places that just give people the ability to put that in their tool belt, right? I know what drugs look like. I know what robberies look like. I know what bad guys look like, I think, in my head. But human trafficking comes in all shapes and sizes. The traffickers are not, like Michele said, they're not your classic pimp wearing a hat with a feather sticking out. It may be a young man, it could be a young woman, it could be somebody's own parents. Children are trafficked because parents live in addiction and need to supply their habits. This could go on. We could talk about this for so long, right? There's so many variables to this. I think just being aware of what it is and being able to recognize it and taking that stand and saying, you know what, that doesn't look right, I'm going to report this.
Great advice.
That's great advice.
Michele,
All right.
did you have anything you wanted to say to wrap up? You look like you had a comment.
I'm trying to get patient. So public awareness, for sure. A lot of organizations to put this out in the open, with signage, because number one, they don't acknowledge, what how prevalent it is in the community, and from a PR perspective, it's something that a lot of organizations want to advertise. So we don't have that public awareness campaign that's out there, about human trafficking, to educate the general population about what this is and how how we can all help to prevent it. And it's through knowledge and power, and it's just such a it's such a topic that is taboo. That many people won't even engage in the conversation and won't even acknowledge this. And we need to move beyond that to get to a place where, we can limit it.
Okay, great.
Great message.
Well, I think at this point, we could talk about this probably for another hour. It's just really such a fascinating topic. I really appreciate Dereck and Michele. You're coming on and spending time to educate us and our listeners. There's so much that I didn't know as a physician, and I'm sure Nancy feels the same. And I'm sure many of our listeners also feel the same. There's a lot that I learned today that I didn't know. I hadn't even thought about the economic trafficking. I always thought about the sex trafficking as really the main problem. And it seems like it's really, there's a much broader issue than I even understood. So I want to thank you very much. It was a great topic to talk about. We'll get that information posted. And I want to once again thank our sponsor, Bay Coast Bank. Bay Coast really wants to have us do these types of talks, to do talks that are interesting and educational to the community. And I give them a lot of credit for that. So if you have interest in their services, you can visit them at baycoastbank.com or call 508-678-7641 to learn more. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. And we'll be back in 2 weeks with another topic of interest. And, once again, this is Chris and Nancy from 27 Degrees Consulting. And this is the 27th Degree. And Dereck and Michele, thank you very, very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you both.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Have a good day.